Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is in Geneva today ahead of a crucial round of US-Iran nuclear talks. He will meet with Rafael Grossi, who is the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, for technical discussions on Iran's nuclear program. This comes as the US has deployed a second aircraft carrier to the region, raising tensions, while the US seeks to expand talks to include Iran's missile stockpile. Tehran insists it will only discuss curbing its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran also faces mounting pressure from the IAEA to clarify the fate of its enriched uranium stockpile after recent Israeli-US strikes. We are now being joined by Saul Sadka, who's a political commentator, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. What are the main objectives for these talks that Iran's foreign minister is likely to pursue with the IAEA ahead of these US negotiations?
Well, for Iran, it looks like the intent is to try and stall for time as they prepare for the inevitable attack that is looming against them. It could be that they believe, this has always been their practice in the past. There have been numerous rounds of negotiations over their nuclear program over the past 20 years, and each time they try and drag out the process, trying to get a better deal. Unfortunately, on the other side of the equation this time is Donald Trump, and they have a track record of negotiating with him that doesn't work out well for them. They haven't managed to manipulate him in the way they've managed to manipulate other world leaders, and it's most likely that he is actually manipulating them and leading them down the garden path so that in the near future, at some point, their remnants of their nuclear program and ballistic missile program will be removed from the table. And perhaps after that, they will be more amenable to negotiations about the way they treat their own people and their proxies around the Middle East.
And how important is this engagement in shaping the framework for the talks that are coming up between US and Iran?
Well, the talks between US and Iran, if they happen, are very unlikely to lead anywhere meaningful on account of the track record that we see with similar talks in the past, particularly with the Trump administration, first one, and now this one. The demands of the Trump administration are relatively extreme in terms of what the Iranians could ever be expected to accept. And even though I'm sure there are certain people in Iran who are smart enough to understand that their back is against the wall and they don't really have any choices, unfortunately for those moderates inside Iran, there are also hardliners who control many of the actions of the state and who simply might want to go down with the ship. And so negotiating with a polity like the Iranian Islamic regime is very difficult.
And do you think Iran will hold any leverage to gain by coordinating with the IAEA ahead of talks with the US that might potentially be coming up? We're not too sure yet, but do you think they will be holding leverage?
Will they be holding leverage by negotiating with the No, I don't think so. I don't think the Atomic Agency is capable of really helping them. They have been restricting their access over the past 6 months. And in fact, it was the essential, what Iran viewed as a betrayal by the IAEA back in May that laid the ground for the attacks in June. The relationship between Iran and this agency is a cat and mouse game. And at this point, the agency really has no further meaningful role. The demands on the Iranians are going to be for them to verifiably end their nuclear program, and that will not be done by the IAEA. It will be done by other parties. So going forward, I don't anticipate they will have much to add to the conversation.
And do you think these talks in Geneva, will they will there be progress, or do you think there won't be any progress to influence the tone that Iran wants to go in with these potential talks with the US?
No, I very much doubt there's going to be any particular progress. It's not going to make any particular difference to the way the US view them. The US administration isn't really swayed by any kind of diplomatic language or conversations in any case. So it's all really playing for time. But my guess is the Iranians are making a very big mistake, because while they are playing for time, it looks like the Americans are also playing for time. The Americans, over the past month and a half now, have been building up an ever-increasing array of weapons against Iran, all around Iran, in every direction. And certainly, the longer this standoff continues between Iran, which is not in a position to break out into a bomb at this point, and the Americans, the worse it is for them. They are going to get clobbered at Trump's decision. As soon as he decides, that will be the day when Iran gets whacked. And Iran, by playing for time, is perhaps benefiting some of its individual leaders who might find ways to get their money out of the country, etc. But in general, it's not going to help the regime. And
with these talks today, what do you think Iran's going into expecting out of this? What do you think they're expecting? Help, advice? Like, what do you think they're going in to do?
So, like I said, it's not entirely clear what Iran expects to happen. I'm sure, like I said, that there are certainly people inside the regime who are smart enough to understand that the wise act would be to do whatever the Americans tell them. Stop funding their proxies, to stop building their weapons caches, and to hand over the nuclear material that they still have probably buried under the ruins of Fordow and Natanz. Unfortunately, that's very unlikely to happen because of internal divisions within Iran. And therefore, what we're seeing, all these negotiations, all the back and forth, all the threat from Iran, all the bluster, it is all a game. It's all a game to try and stall for time. And time is something the Americans have of much more than them, because the Iranians are also facing increasing internal pressure. The misery of the people in Iran is much worse than it was 2 months ago, nearly, when the protests started, protests that they suppressed, killing more than 30,000 of their own people. Those people and their friends and their families, so millions of people, are not going to forget what was done to them last month, and they are biding their time. So they have enemies on the inside and they have enemies on the outside. And the absolute chaos that they're facing means that they really, if they were smart, would make a deal with the people on the outside in the hope that that would allow them to continue suppressing the people on the inside. Unfortunately for them, for their leaders, they're probably not capable of making that decision. Therefore, the leadership at some point is going to take some heavy blows. And after that, we will see, are the people inside capable of then overthrowing a weakened leadership? Time will tell. But the cards on the table mean that the Iranians are absolutely in a checkmate situation. They view themselves as the great chess players. Well, now it's time for them to play some of their last moves. They really have no way out. Their best hope is to capitulate to American demands. But of course, capitulation to American demands is really building up problems into the future, because to keep their population under control, they need regular bouts of the kind of violence we saw last month. They need on a regular basis to kill tens of thousands of their own people. And if they don't have the ballistic weapons, and they don't have the nuclear threat, and they don't have the proxies, the next time they try that kind of thing, they are likely to get clobbered again by foreign nations, Europeans and Americans. So once they don't have those foreign deterrents, their internal deterrence is also weakened, which is why they don't really want to give it up, even though they recognize their ability to project power beyond their borders is now absolutely minimal.
Thank you, Saul. Don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stressed that any US deal with Iran must include dismantling Iran's nuclear infrastructure, not just halting uranium enrichment. Netanyahu revealed that he told US President Donald Trump about this last week. He emphasized that the deal must involve the removal of enriched minerals and that dismantling of the equipment responsible for Iran's enrichment capabilities. Netanyahu expressed skepticism about the ongoing negotiations, but made Israel's stance clear. Talks between the US and Iran are set to continue this week, with both sides aiming for a deal that brings economic benefits. The US has ramped up its military presence in the region, dispatching a second aircraft carrier to prepare for potential military action if the talks fail. We are now being joined again by Saul Sadkar. Thank you for joining us back here on NewsX World. How might Tehran perceive external pressure to remove nuclear facilities versus simply freezing or limiting activities?
Well, how might they perceive the external pressure? They certainly don't. We always have to make a distinction clearly between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. The Iranian people, the vast majority of them, have seen their government waste over $2 trillion, which is approximately 10 times their GDP. So 10 years of the entire GDP has been wasted on this nuclear program. It's impoverished their country because of the sanctions that have stacked up. It's destroyed their economy. It's destroyed their ability to make a living. It's led to all their best and brightest leaving. They now live in LA. So they've had to make a distinction between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. The Iranian people, absolutely, the vast majority certainly don't want any nuclear program. The nuclear program, if the Iranians were to have successfully completed it, there's no prospect of that in the next decade. But if they would have, that would have turned Iran potentially into another North Korea. North Korea is the most repressive regime in the world, and nobody can dare touch them or talk about the way they repress their people because, of course, they have nuclear weapons that they can fire back at you in the event of any kind of military confrontation. If Iran had managed, the primary victims of that, apart from, of course, Israel and the Gulf nations who would live under a nuclear umbrella, the primary victims would have been the people of Iran themselves, who would essentially become serfs to the Islamic regime.
And what does Netanyahu's demand to dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure beyond stopping enrichment signal about Israel's core security concerns?
Well, Netanyahu's core security concern on a personal level for 25 years has been to ensure that Iran does not get nuclear bombs. He went a long way in achieving that in June last year, when the vast majority of Iran's nuclear capabilities were destroyed. However, it is believed that they still retain approximately half a ton of enriched uranium, enough to build a few bombs if they had the capacity. And the Israelis will not rest until that material is accounted for and taken out of Iran or made unusable. And the meeting this time with Trump, which continued for many hours, and revealed what was revealed from Netanyahu and Trump's words afterwards, is far less important than what was actually happening on the inside. What they say is not necessarily related in any way to what they were actually considering and discussing. We know, from example, in January, when Netanyahu was last with Trump in Florida, that Trump told Netanyahu in public that if the Iranians start to try to rebuild their nuclear program, Netanyahu should attack them and fast. And that is fundamentally the core realization for the Iranians, that there are people watching them all the time, inside their country, outside their country, satellites. They have no realistic way of putting together a bomb. So all that this nuclear material is doing is providing them with a very small amount of leverage to allow them to fight another day. And fight another day is going to be much more difficult because they're not going to have the kind of threats that they're used to. They never really had a serious army. All they had was the deterrence that was available to them via the prospect of having a nuclear weapon and via their ballistic missiles and via their proxies. And their proxies are largely taken off the board now. They are weakened beyond repair and very hard to resupply from Iran. And their ballistic weapons are reduced, probably by about half, and have shown to be relatively ineffective, and certainly not strategically threatening since they're not accurate enough, and their nuclear program, the core deterrent, is vastly reduced. And Israel would very much like to see that completely reduced, and ditto for the ballistic missiles and the proxy network.
Thank you so much, Saul Sadka, for joining us here today on NewsX World.